Should I still try and talk to this guy? Beep beep. Zeep sort. Testing 1, 2, 3. We're good? Okay. Alrighty, I'm going to talk about AWS Amplify just a little bit. I just learned about it like a couple weeks ago, so it's pretty new to me. I just thought it sounded kind of nifty, and I figured I'd let you guys know about it so you can do some more Googling. You can go to Front-End Masters and probably learn a lot more, but this will kind of give you a little gist. It's kind of just a little overview of their like getting started page, I guess you could say. They have some good help docs, and basically all you have to do to get started, you can have Node and npm installed. You can use Yarn too. And then you just install AWS Amplify CLI, and they have a lot of pretty good command line commands. And you start with the first one, and you just go amplify configure, and that kind of sets up like it basically just makes an IAM user for you. Because like one thing that I've never really liked about AWS is like making IAM accounts for like or users for like and roles for like everything you have to do there. So with this, you just give it a name, and then it'll just kind of pre-populate all the stuff it needs. So you just kind of hit next on IAM, and then bada bing, you got yourself a user that'll be able to do everything it needs to do. And that's kind of what Amplify is going to do for the most part, is just kind of set up a lot of AWS services for you, so you don't have to, because I don't know, sometimes it can be a little overwhelming. You'll go to a service and there's like so many different options on like how to configure it, and you're like, I don't know what I need and what I don't need. So Amplify kind of takes a lot of that out of it for you. And then their docs are pretty cool. They have a little select your framework button at the top, so you can choose which framework you're going to be building in, and then it'll like update the help docs for you. So then it'll change everything to, if you switch over to React, it'll kind of give you all the React commands to get started there. And so once you've got your app made, and then you install Amplify API and PubSub, and that's just kind of your endpoints. So then you've got your app kind of created, and then Amplify init is kind of your first command on like setting up your backend. It'll kind of create some IAM roles for you. It'll ask for some info about your app, just kind of like your source and build folders, your start and build commands, and a couple other random things. Just kind of what AWS region you want it to be in, and just some random stuff like that. So that kind of just gets it started, so your everything else you do kind of knows where to look and what to point to. And then you're on Amplify push, and that's kind of like it's kind of like git commit almost, is like the equivalent for Amplify. It'll create, the first time you do it, it'll create this AWS exports file, which is kind of like your file that stores all of like the services and info about them that all these commands are setting up. So for this first one, it'll have like the deployment bucket URL for you and a couple other random things. And then when you run Amplify push, then it also it'll go and create all the new services and stuff in Amazon for you. So that's when it'll actually make the like S3 bucket for you for where everything's going to be stored later. And then your app, you're going to want some storage for it, so you add API, and that kind of they like to use GraphQL, so it guides you through setting up a GraphQL schema. It just kind of, it's like a basic to-do list, so it just kind of has like name and description is all it really sets up on the schema. But it's kind of nice just to have that built for you. You pick like an API name for it, and then it'll create all the files in your in like a GraphQL folder on source. It'll give you your schema and stuff there, and then it's hooked up with AppSync, and so it'll write out some queries for that too, just kind of some easy ones to copy and paste and reference for making other objects and schemas and stuff. So, and then again, you just run Amplify push, and that'll actually create your AppSync service on AWS and set up your Dynamo database, and then you'll be good to go. And then once you've got that kind of set up, then all you really have to do in your app.js folder or file is just import API and pub/sub, and then do the little API configure, and config is your AWS exports file. That's because that'll be storing all the URLs and access keys and some other random stuff. So that'll be also in your gitignore file too. So you don't want to push that up because it'll have some kind of sensitive information. And yeah, so you just kind of add that in real quick, and you're good to go. It also comes with some UI components that are kind of ready to go and easy to use with other AWS services. They have a pretty neat authenticator component with, and it has like a with authenticator hardware component, but that only works, they only have that for React and React Native. But that one you can just kind of wrap around your app, and then it'll kind of build out a full sign in and sign up page for you. You don't really have to do much else. And then, yeah, it has a chatbot, which I haven't really looked into at all. And then a photo picker and an album, where all you really have to do is pass it a path parameter, because it'll know where your S3 bucket is already anyway, based on the other, based on your deploy bucket from configuring your whole Amplify project. So they're pretty easy to use. And yeah. You can add authentication too. It uses AWS's Cognito, and it'll set that up for you. If you just choose the default configuration, it just, all it does is set up like sign in and sign up options on Cognito. But then you can do some more in the manual configuration and stuff. I haven't tried it, so I only know exactly how it runs through it, but I know with that you can like set up, you can have it so it'll like do like two-factor, or you can have like a Google's CAPTCHA set up in front of it, and you can have it send like a verification email. So a couple other options you can do, I think, with that manual configuration. And then one of the last things you do is just Amplify add hosting, and that'll kind of push everything up onto your S3 bucket where all your like source files are stored, and it'll set up CloudFront for you, so everything will be served through CloudFront. Kind of a nifty thing they do too is they automatically like issue a certificate for like HTTPS, so you get kind of certified as a secure domain. So that's kind of handy. You don't have to do anything there. You just tell it what your domain name is, and when you run this command, it just asks for your domain name, and then it'll just kind of settle up. And then Amplify publish is kind of your last command to run. So that'll build and deploy your first version, and yeah, then you'll just be kind of good to go. And then you can go to the AWS console and go to the Amplify section. When you do build, there's these little checkboxes that'll show you what stage it's at, and then you can connect it to your whatever repository you're using. So it does support GitHub, Bitbucket, GitLab, and code commit. So connected to one of those. You can turn on auto deploy. So every time you commit, it'll just deploy all your changes. And it does like build based on the changes, so it won't like rebuild things if they're not changed. It's kind of smart about that. And then you can set like environment variables there and some other settings about your whole app. And then yeah, and then it's pretty cheap. Their pricing is pretty solid. You'll get like a year free as long as you're not building too much. I mean, 1,000 minutes per month is pretty good. But then even after that, it's not too expensive to keep going. They gave a little example on their pricing page, and for 5 developers, committing code 2 times a day, and it was saying for each of them, so 10 commits a day, so it would be rebuilding 10 times every day. They were saying that would cost about $6, and then with 300 people using it every day, it'd cost about $2. So $8 to run your app if you have that much going on. But if you got a lot less, it could be just a couple bucks a month to run it. So it's not too shabby. So yeah, kind of a couple pros and cons about it. It is super easy to set up. The help docs are really, really well written. It's kind of cool how it switches between whatever framework you're using and kind of caters to what you're doing. It's really nice that the commands are set up the services for you, because then you don't have to worry about a lot of that. The con of that is it does use a lot of different Amazon services. So it's pretty easy to just kind of set it up, and then you just kind of keep following docs and just running all the commands I tell you to, and then now you've got a whole bunch of random AWS services spun up, and you kind of have to remember what all you just did and make sure you're managing those correctly. It does have a lot of functionality built in, but it can be kind of hard to customize beyond what's available there. And it's pretty darn affordable, I'd say. You can get cheaper if you do your own stuff, but for how easy it is to get spun up, I think it's pretty good cost benefit. And it is still somewhat new. I think it's actually November 2017. I meant to, but yeah, that's mostly AWS Amplify on a little note.
We'll be taking a 10-minute break here before we have manifestation focus. At 10 minutes, we'll put a timer up here so we can see. Run to the bathroom. Bathrooms are back there, just beyond the telephone booth, past the desk there.
Brandon. This is me sound checking. All right. That's too small. Huh? Too much? That's too much. All right. Can everybody hear me okay? You still good to go over there, Brandon?
Still good to go.
All right, fantastic. All right. First of all, thanks, Brandon, Brian, and also the folks on the organizing committee who aren't here tonight. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys about a relatively new front-end technology. One of the things that I really love about JavaScript MN meetings is the breadth of experience and the openness to new stuff that we all bring to these meetings. I am older than many of you, but I haven't actually been coding for very long. I was a chemist for 20 years and then attended Prime Academy's boot camp 3 years ago. Sounds like there are a few primers in the audience. And worked at a couple of different places, but for the last year and a little bit, I've been working at a company called Sezzle in downtown Minneapolis. We make buy now, pay later widgets and plugins for e-commerce providers, and actually also provide the financing to fuel those widgets. So we are growing and hiring. If you, after hearing me talk, are interested in Sezzle, or you turns out you think you might like working with me, I want to welcome you to get in touch with me. If you, after hearing me, you don't want anything to do with me, it's a fairly large building. You don't have to interact with me. So I want to encourage you to check us out. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about a technology that we don't actually use at my company, Sezzle, but which I have used in a number of personal projects over the last 5 or 6 months, called Svelte. And Svelte bills itself as a sort of alternative, antidote, I don't know what you would call it, to modern, fairly heavy-handed and heavy JavaScript frameworks that, let's face it, we all use now, right? We all use these things. And the makers of Svelte, which is kind of a ragtag band of open source developers, there is no large company that backs Svelte, are looking to build something that works a little bit differently. Before I start talking about Svelte, though, I do want to talk very briefly about how we as JavaScript developers manage reactivity on the DOM, how we changed the DOM. This is why we use JavaScript, right, is to make our views interactive. And over the many years that we have been doing this, I know I just claimed history that I don't actually own, I've only been doing this for 3 years, but tens of years ago, a really common strategy for updating and changing the DOM was to traverse the DOM. So you'd actually build your HTML in advance, you'd pepper that HTML with IDs or class tags that you'd then later search for in your JavaScript. And if you've written a query selector or a find element by ID statement in your time, then you have done this. jQuery is a technology that made this a little bit simpler to write, but didn't make it work any better. The problem with traversing the DOM is that it's really slow, right? And so DOM updates take a long time using using those old methods. A far faster way, as it turns out, to change the DOM is to build it from scratch in JavaScript, to actually inject individual nodes and node content with JavaScript statements. And so if you felt like query selector was a painful method to use, these methods are truly painful, right? To actually create nodes and then to populate them with other nodes and then to append them as children to other nodes. It's a really, this is terribly verbose code. And I have done this occasionally, but it's really terrible, actually. It does not offer a primo developer experience, is what we'll say. And so I think what that means is that now, sorry, before I leave that topic, when I speak to developers about their history with JavaScript, sometimes they will tell me that they never do this. But actually, we all do this. When we use frameworks, frameworks compile into code that essentially does this for us, right? And so we're now used to using frameworks and libraries. Here I just give one example of a React component, and under the hood, the React compiler is either working with classes that end up as HTML and elements, or end up building nodes from scratch when it needs to. And the advantage of doing that is now the engine has references, direct references to every single node on the DOM, so that when it needs to change one, it doesn't have to go looking for it. It already has a pointer to that node. It can make a modification. Unfortunately, modern libraries carry a lot of weight. They carry a lot of weight in the form of a runtime, which has to be delivered with pretty much any developed front-end project. React, just for example, delivers React itself and React DOM to every project that you've ever made. And minified, those two files make up about 160K in weight. That means if you've just got a input box on a blank screen, that's 160K in React. Now that was exaggerating. We don't make views that are like that. But I have to admit, at Sezzle, we frequently make views that we expect our customers to interact with on mobile phones. And they're one-off views. They're not large multi-page applications. They're something that they got to type their phone number into, right? That doesn't really need a large runtime to accompany it. I should be able to build that easily in something that maybe isn't raw JavaScript. Another accompanying problem with libraries like React is they tend to be a little bit heavy-handed on the DOM manipulation side. React, for example, in React DOM on the front end stores the entire DOM tree. This is the virtual DOM, as it's often called. And when you make single modifications to that DOM, React does a very dutiful job of checking every single node in that tree, asking, did this change? Did this change? Did this change? And if you're only typing one number into a box, you probably don't need to check all of those other nodes. It's probably sufficient to just do the one change that you need to make. So if you've been working, I bring up React as an example because I've been to this meeting a number of times, and most of you have said that you are at least familiar with React. This isn't really any different in libraries like Vue or Angular. It's basically the same story. They tend to be pretty heavy-handed. What would be great is if there was a tool that compiled to direct reference DOM manipulation JavaScript, but didn't have all of the spaghetti that came along with it. And so that's really the purpose of Svelte, which is a compiler, not technically a framework or a library, that outputs directly to JavaScript, so that the three deliverables that you're sending to your front end are HTML, CSS, and plain old vanilla JavaScript, just like we've always been making. No accompanying React DOM, no engines that have to be delivered along with your code, just the code. I'm going to be today. I thought I would be presenting a lot, but I just decided we're going to live code today because the last time I live coded, it was a disaster, and so I decided let's do that again. So that's what we're going to be doing. I'm going to be showing you how building a very simple application in Svelte works or doesn't work. I'm hoping on works. But three things I want to say before I jump into that code are that Svelte builds from text files. Not technically from HTML, not technically from CSS, not technically from JavaScript, but one file that actually contains all three at once. As a matter of fact, not only does it contain all three at once, which you can do in HTML, right? You can build an HTML that has a style section and a script section, so that's not so crazy. What is a little bit crazy is that Svelte borrows some format and styling from JSX that a lot of Svelte developers like to call HTMLX. That is to say, it uses those curly braces that we use to encapsulate JavaScript expressions inside JSX, but now we're going to do that directly in HTML, and I'll show you what I mean about that in a couple of minutes. Svelte, I mentioned, compiles to JavaScript. How does it get to JavaScript? It uses compiler imports in many of the popular compiler packages. So Webpack, Rollup, a number of importable compilers that we all use for all the projects that we make also have imports that will take Svelte code and turn it into JavaScript. And that's it. There's no other deliverables that have to come with what's being output by Svelte. That's most of the introduction. I'm gonna show you one last slide, which is some stuff that I'm not gonna do because I don't want to have to download and install. We're gonna be working today off of the Svelte website. We're actually not gonna be interacting with this website at all. I just show it to you for reference. We're gonna be following some example introduction build code, and then we're gonna do our own thing, or I'm gonna do my own thing anyway. This is the svelte.dev website. It's got some great tutorials. It's tiny. Let me see if I can blow that up a little bit. There we go. That's better. It's got tutorials. It's got an API listing. It actually has a REPL, which is kind of cool. You can actually build Svelte projects directly in the browser as long as you only really need a couple of files. I could have done this today actually, but I went ahead and decided to use the IDE anyway. If you're interested in learning more about Svelte, this is a great place to start. Another great place to start is one of the tech leads of this open source project, Rich Harris, who has made a few YouTube videos from public talks that he's given. He's an interactive developer at the New York Times. He is one of the funniest software developer presenters I have ever heard in my lifetime. So if after you listen to this from me and say, God, that was the most boring talk I've ever listened to, go listen to Rich Harris. He is a hoot. Is what he is. But anyway, those are a couple of examples of resources that you can look at. Let's close that. But anyway, that slide I was showing you, this slide right here, is one of the entry points in the tutorial section of that website. And basically here it's just inviting me to basically git clone. This dgit is one of a number of git clone-like packages that will allow you to not have to clone the entire project history of something. It will just basically get you the latest commit and code of a project. It's not alone. There's a number of projects that will also do this, but dgit is a fine one. And basically what this does is it takes the template at the Svelte.js GitHub site and initiates a project with it. The JSMN part, I'm sure you understand. The Pokemon part, you will understand. And then in advance of this talk, I've CD'd into, this is wrong, this is from the website, this should be JSMN Pokemon. I already made a mistake, and I'm not even live coding yet. That's not a good sign. And then, of course, npm install to install all of the dependencies in the template project, and npm run dev. I've already done all those things, and that means we're ready to start coding. So let's do that thing, right? No, I didn't want to go do that. I hate the three-finger thing. I hate the three-finger thing. Okay, so here is what I ended up downloading here's the project that I ended up downloading from the template site. This is my JSMN Pokemon project. And what you can see here are basically, I'm going to close this, are two folders, a source folder and a public folder. Those you've seen in other compilers and types of programs before. My source is going to be feeding my public, right? It's going to be compiling into the public folder. This source folder has two files. It actually has a third file that I added. This is just a function that capitalizes words. I'm going to be using it later. I didn't want to have to get that from memory, so I'm going to put that away. Really, this has two files in it. One is main.js, which is the JavaScript entry point of the project, which basically just injects an app into the target, into the document body element of the DOM. That's really easy to find, not too hard to search for, so that's where that's going. We're going to go give you an idea of things that are here. Here's our index.html. That's the whole thing, and basically all of our JavaScript is going to be injecting into this body section at the bottom, which is currently empty. That's going to populate our entire website. That's actually not unusual. React does that same thing. Vue does that same thing. If you open index.html CSS file that you can create, if there is bundle.js, and bundle.js is the output JavaScript of this project. Now, this starter project is extremely simple, and already you can see that bundle.js, from what is basically a 5-line JavaScript project, is 300 lines. I said that there weren't actually, there wasn't any deliverables other than raw JavaScript. Well, I hedged on the truth there. There's actually about 300 lines of JavaScript that minifies to about 1.5K. That's a required accompaniment to any project in this set. Not 160K, 1.5K. That's the smallest Svelte project that you can make, which is basically this project. Now that I've shown you those things, here is my app.svelte project. This is the whole project right now, and this is a .svelte file, which is no language. It's just a text file. And this text file, you can see, has three basic sections. It's got a script section up at the top in which we can compose JavaScript. It's got a style section in the middle that I've closed up because I've created some styles in there in advance, not too many, available to expressions in the HTML section, right? So at the top, I've got let dynamically, as it turns out, into this curly braced section of the HTML. To those of you who have worked in modern JavaScript frameworks, this probably looks very familiar, right? This looks very similar to stuff that you guys have made in other frameworks. I'm going to try to convince you by the end of this talk that what you might make in Svelte is a lot smaller than what you might make in other frameworks. And what does that look like? Here's what we got right here. Hello, JSMN. Okay, so I have to admit something to you. I have a teenage son, and he doesn't really like Pokemon anymore. He used to like it a lot, and we used to actually play the Pokemon card game a lot. I missed the Pokemon card game, actually. I kind of liked Pokemon, the little guys, and they did fun things, and they were all smiley. I don't know. I miss Pokemon. So I thought today we might go ahead and make a Pokemon website instead of a JSMN website. We're not only going to be able to use Pokemon as an inspiration. We're going to also try to hit the Pokemon API to get some data on Pokemon as part of this project. But let's start simple. Let's go ahead and just make it so that instead of the title of my website being JSMN, let's include a trigger that allows us to change that title. So I'm going to go ahead and add a button here. glass. This is definitely glass this time. Let's add a button, and my button is going to say change title to Pokemon. As it turns out, it's not so easy to write a, there we go, there's that accented E there, change title to Pokemon. And I'm gonna go ahead and add to this button an on-click handler. Right, and my on-click handler, I want to trigger a function. I'll call that function change title. And now up here, I need to actually declare that function change title. And that's not going to take any argument for now. And we're going to go ahead and make that function redeclare name here. EE. Right? Okay, so my function change title is now going to alter the definition of name when that button is clicked. If all goes well, let's save that. My build system should rebuild. There's my button. Let's see if it works. Woohoo! All right, we can change the title to Pokemon. I haven't built anything that you guys haven't built 100 times already, but this illustrates one thing, and that is that there are handlers on all elements, not just buttons, but also inputs and divs and all that kind of stuff, that are very analogous to the ones that you find in other frameworks, right? You've used on-click before, I'm sure, in your projects. So that's good. As a matter of fact, not only is that good, text input, and that's a self-closing one. And we're going to go ahead variable. Let's call this variable, and I'm not going to actually assign it a value just yet. And you know what I would love to do is I would love to make it so that I can type my favorite Pokemon into that input box and have that become the title of this page. So let's see. To do that, I need a function choose favorite. Going to accept an event favorite equal to event, is that right? I did. And now, instead of my button changing, let's change it to favorite. Okay, that's not so good. We're going to work on that in a moment. But the box says undefined, and I don't want to change the title to Pokemon. Actually, I said I didn't want to set favorite, but I actually do. Let's make it empty string. That'll get rid of undefined. It'll still be empty string, though. And down here, where it said change title to Pokemon, I don't want to change the title to Pokemon anymore. I want to type it inside the braces, don't I? All right. Let's see if that worked. All right. All right. You guys are very gracious to clap. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Now, unfortunately, when I first load this website, this is pretty sad, right? Change title to, that's a little bit disappointing. What I would love to have happen is if favorite is populated, go ahead and give me the button, right? Let me click the button. But if there is no favorite, then maybe give me something else like, hey, Andy, put something in the input box, right? So normally in React or Vue or Angular, you would construct JavaScript statements. You'd say if, and maybe you'd have some dirty or touched or something going on there. It could get pretty complicated. Remember that this whole framework is about simplicity, and so I'm gonna create here a conditional if statement block in braces. That is $if favorite, and then that is going to show the element that's after if favorite. Remember that this button element actually technically is HTML. It's not a JavaScript expression. So I can't just put it inside curlies. I have to do something a little bit more complicated. And then, right, so now I'm going to save that. And let's see how that went over here. Okay, that's fair. Now the button is gone, but now I don't know what the heck to do. So let's go ahead and add to this an else block. Right, else, let's put in a paragraph that says, please type a Pokemon name. All right. How'd that go? There it is. Please type a Pokemon name. And now when I type a name, the button shows up and I can change the name to a Pokemon. All right. Yes, your hands are going to get tired, people. That's the success I'm predicting from tonight. It could end at any time. Okay, so so that illustrates, I think, some of the brevity of or at least the intended brevity of the Svelte package. This is not real JavaScript, and that admittedly is what you sacrifice, right? If I had built this in React, I would use classes and render functions, and everything that I wrote would be valid JavaScript. You could put it through any JavaScript interpreter. Your IDE would tell you where mistakes are. Actually, in this case, I have an IDE import that browses my Svelte file and suggests corrections. There are such plugins for most of the major IDEs. But nevertheless, I'm not writing valid JavaScript. I'm writing crazy, right? Bracket # if doesn't mean anything. Well, maybe it does in some language, but not in JavaScript. So that's a little bit weird. But anyway, I think I've started this project out pretty well. I feel pretty good about this whole live coding thing. Let's go ahead and, so let's see. We did this. I showed off the parts of a Svelte text file. That was good. We did some if-else. If I had wanted to, I could create more else-if conditionals in those curly braced sections. I do mention on this slide that there are some other more complex conditions that I can place on event handlers as well. For example, if I didn't want to have to declare, if I didn't want to issue a prevent default command in JavaScript, I can just put it on the end of a pipe on submit and it will take care of that for me. So that's another convenience of this HTMLX syntax in Svelte. But here, let's get more ambitious, right? So I have been working so far in one Svelte file, in one component, the app component. Let's try to build a multi-component project in Svelte like we would do in React. So we're going to go ahead and start with this app head of this tree, and we're going to go ahead. I'm going to focus on these two middle ones, the Pokemon entry and the Pokemon finder components. I bet I'm not going to make it to this team builder thing at the bottom. So let's have the goal of these two middle ones. And one frequent aspect of React Vue Angular components in complex projects is managing communication between components that might not be adjacent to each other. These two components, they're not going to be very far from each other. They're both going to hang from app, but we're going to pretend like they're distant from each other and that they have challenges communicating. As it turns out, Svelte comes to the rescue of that challenge as well. So here's my plan for what we're going to be doing. So here we are in this app.svelte component. I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder, which I'm going to call components, right? And then we'll make a file that I think one of mine was called entry.svelte, right? And the other one was called Finder, I think? Finder. Live coding. All right, so those are my two new files And I'm going to use those. I'm going to use those two components to do two jobs. My entry component is actually going to do kind of what we've been doing already. It's going to have a text box where I can type in my favorite Pokemon and I can search for data on that Pokemon. And then my finder component is going to display the results of that search. Could I have organized those components more intelligently in this app? Absolutely. Am I going to? No, we're live coding. We're doing things the stupid way. So I'm going to go ahead and start with this entry file because it's kind of what we've done already. It needs a script section, but actually, as it turns out, it does not need a style section. I'm going to just do script, and then it's going to need some HTML too. Down here in my, oops, I didn't want that. Down here in my app, let's go ahead and take this input and the button. We want all of that in entry. How about? We're going to stick all of that in here. And now in app, let's go ahead and create a div to wrap my two components together. I'm actually going to, there's a class that I wanted to give this div. What is it called? I don't even remember. It is called Pokeflex. Of course it's called Pokeflex. So class equals Pokeflex, because we're going to do some Flexbox, but we're not going to do it. It's already done. Yay! And then I'm going to go ahead and call an entry component. There's a format that you've probably seen before, and a finder component. Right? There are those two components. Now, of course, it doesn't know where those components are coming from. So let's go over here into the script section. It does. Yep. Yeah, you're right. I did declare these functions, but I could have used arrow functions. It would have worked just fine. Yep. So let's go ahead and import entry from, and that's one up. Entry.svelte. It's probably going to complain about that because I don't have anything in that file yet. And we're going to do the same thing with Finder. I'm going to copy and paste so that I don't mess up. Oh, it's in the components folder. Thank God you guys told me that. It's actually on the same level, isn't it? Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that you're working with me on this. Thank you. That was helpful. Let's put that here, and now I need to change this to Finder, right? What do we think about that? All right, so there's my entry component and my Finder component. Let's go ahead and real quick, let's give my entry component here a div of class equals entry, and there's no way that I have pre-generated CSS to give meaning to that. No way that that happened. We're live coding. We don't do anything in advance. So we're going to put that there. And then just to make sure that things don't complain, I can already see that things are complaining here. I'm going to also pre-populate my Finder component. And I'm going to put a div there as well. Equals Finder class. Finder CLSSS. Thank you for not laughing too much. All right, so there's that. Oh, self-closing, thank you, in that div. And now Let's see here. And then there's all kinds of things here that don't have definitions because I left their variables in app. So each one of these components is scoped, right? Variables that are inside one file don't apply to other files. Actually, that's also true of class of CSS as well. So styles that I define in one component, Svelte locally confines to that component. It actually creates, if your style section has names for classes, oh, it looks like I don't have those, it will create class names and then give them one of these sort of pseudo-random number names so that the classes that apply to one component don't bleed over into other components. We'll take a look at that in a second once I actually have this thing working in the front end. So I think that I need to take these functions for now and move it over here. We'll go back to hello JSMN as our title there. So that component is doing things that it shouldn't now. Let's see what oh no, it says it's working. All right. Okay, so there's two little boxes here. I did some CSS magic in preparation for this. So my flex box here is creating these two components, the entry component and the finder component. Let's go ahead and make this entry component work. Here we are, right? And what I would really like for this entry component to do is I would like to type in the box and I would click the button that I want to search for information about a Pokemon, right? So I like this choose favorite thing. I like that. The button, though, is changing the title of this, and now who knows what change title is doing. Now, I want this component, this entry component, Angular app. One strategy for allowing all seen or heard that done would be to centrally manage state at the top. And I could do that here. I could actually use props in actually add to this Totodile. Why not? Right? So there is a prop in my entry component, and now I can go to entry, accept that prop to deliver that prop into my entry component. Svelte has hijacked the export command, so I can say export let default Pokemon. Now that prop will populate the export and had all of this baggage about what export means based on JavaScript or something like that. But Svelte doesn't care about your JavaScript. It has changed the definition of export in this script section to mean these are props that are coming from the parent into. We'll go ahead and in Pokemon. Right? So that will execute one. Totodile is in the text box. I don't have to keep it there, though. I can change that if I want to. Oh, hey, my button says Totodile, too, so that's pretty cool. But back to my original subject, I want that button to now send information to another component without prop drilling, right? I don't want to send functions and containers and all kinds of stuff down to my components. I want that information to jump. And in a system like React, we might use a store to do that. We might use the context API, for example, or we might use Redux to do that. Svelte has its own system of stores. It's very simple, actually. As a matter of fact, Svelte has an interface that is met by stores. So you can actually import a wide variety of open source store vehicles to serve as a store, but the Svelte project actually comes with its own. I'm going to go ahead and create it in its own file, in fact. I'm going to call this Pokemon store.js. There's that empty file. And here I'm going to go ahead and import a type called writable. I use the word type, but I don't think that was the right word to use. I think it's a method. Writable from Right, so there's that. And then I'm going to go ahead and declare I'm going to search for Pokemon as a writable store. And I'm going to initialize that store with the value empty string. So I'm not searching for anything right off the bat. And then I'm going to go ahead and export that as the default. What is it? Search for Pokemon? Could have named that better, huh? All right. So there's my store exported from PokemonStore.js. Now, in entry.svelte is going to import that store. So we're going to import search for Pokemon. It was the default export, so I don't have to name it search for Pokemon if I don't want to, but I'm going to go ahead and do that. And it's going to come from up one. It landed here, didn't it? Yeah, it did. Pokemon store.js. Let's try that. Okay, so search for Pokemon is my store. It didn't like that. What did it not like about it? Just fine. Must be a syntax issue. Or maybe I'm just not done yet. Stores is not defined. Is that? Yep, it is. You are right. Thank you. There we are. Okay, back to happy again. All right. So now we're back here in entry.svelte. So search for Pokemon is my store. And what I want to have happen is when I click the button, I want it to populate that store with what I typed in the box, right? So that means change title. Actually, I'm going to change that to search. How about? Because change title's a little deceptive. And then the value of the input box, which is favorite, right? All right. I have to admit, I'm really not going to know very well how this works until I subscribe to that store, until I have something somewhere else that listens to that store and then reports what the content of the store is. I might do that in this file, but let's just go for broke and let's go over to the other file and start building what it is that we're trying to build. I'm going to need this line, so let's get that. And we are headed over to finder.svelte, where we are also going to import this file here. And for now, let's get rid of this crazy self-closing div. Thank you for giving me suggestions and also auto-typing what I wanted to type. And let's go ahead and just put Pokemon to search for, right? And up here, I'm going to go ahead and let that baby. Come on. All right, so that gets that ready to go. What I now need to do is I need to subscribe to my store. And store.subscribe takes as its only argument a function that's going to be executed when the value of the store changes. And that function is going to start with value, or whatever I want it to be. And then it's going to execute some code in response to that change. Let's go ahead and set, for now, let's set Pokemon to search for to value. I did, didn't I? I didn't use Pokemon to search for. How did that happen? Did I copy the wrong thing? There we go. That's better. All righty. So here we are in Totodile, and my store right now is empty, right? I initialized it to have no content. So the fact that this box over here on the right doesn't have any content, that doesn't worry me. Let's see what happens when I push this button. Woohoo! All right, so what just happened is my button populated the store locally in the left-hand component. The right-hand component was listening to the store. It detected a change, and then it executed the function that it was responsible for executing. All right, how am I doing here? It is 8 o'clock. How long have I been presenting? An hour? All right. Well, I tell you what, then let's go ahead and not do the API hitting part. I know that that was probably the exciting part that you were all waiting for, the part where, come on screen, do the 3-finger thing. The part where we hit the Pokemon API. If you're interested in hitting the Pokemon API on your own, I'm going to welcome you to go ahead and head to the JavaScript MN Slack, where I posted the completed project that I was trying to build. I got some distance. I didn't do too bad. There's some pretty nifty HTTP-related simplifications in the Svelte library that make it really fast to build gets and displays conditional on await statements that are baked into the language. So you don't have to have these long things where you build the promise and you figure out what you're doing with the promise and you do essentially a bunch of JavaScript in order to display the thing. In Svelte, you just display the thing. It's pretty easy. And it handles all the promise handling for you. That doesn't have anything to do with the Pokemon API. Sorry about that. Okay, so we got some distance there. We used some stores. I would have done some HTTP if I could have. Read about it later. So to wrap this thing up in 2 minutes. So what does Svelte do and what does it not do? So hopefully I convinced you, or you could imagine, that you could build a pretty simple, pretty quick application in Svelte with not too much code. I think you guys have all built things in React and Angular, and you've probably written more code than I just did, right? Now, admittedly, there's some shortcuts that had to be taken in order to get to where I was. But we definitely had less code. I didn't demonstrate to you the fact that Svelte, as a result of that code and not having to maintain a virtual DOM, updates the DOM faster than those libraries. But if you want that proof, there are a number of speed test metric comparison websites that basically, maybe you've seen these, they build the same project like 50 different ways, and they measure the time it takes to update the DOM. Svelte is blisteringly fast in those comparisons. So that's good. Maybe that's important, maybe that it's not. There are definitely downsides to Svelte. Svelte is new, and it doesn't have a big giant backer of a company behind it. And that means the community is small. There's no TypeScript support. That's kind of a bummer. They're working on it. They want to build working on that. And finally, and maybe this is a bad thing, maybe it's a good thing, Svelte is really not built for multi-page routing type apps. There is no built-in router or open source router project. I think that that's by intent, actually. I think they want this project to be responsible for single views, blisteringly fast single views. They do have an accompanying server-side rendering engine called Sapper, which they intend to do the routing for you, to go ahead and supply multiple single-page views to your user. But if you're used to building a big dashboard in React that has a bunch of, navigation things at the top that present different views and populate the history in the address bar, you're not going to get that from Svelte. Svelte is for very simple interfaces, and it delivers those interfaces in very little code, both on your end and also on the browser end. So that's a quickie comparison of Svelte to the competition. Thank you all for inviting me and for listening to me open source code to you all this afternoon. If you have any questions, I'll be sticking around.
All right, that's our meetup. Thanks for coming. Thank you, Andy, again. Daniel, thanks for sitting over there. Yeah, if you have any ideas on things you want to present on or whatever, please go to Brendan or I, or reach out on Slack, or Twitter, or email, or our website, or whatever. Otherwise, yeah, thanks for coming. See you next month. If we could have a couple people come help try to clean up some of these chairs, that would be super appreciated.